Hello everyone and welcome to a new Presearing video. Today I would like to talk about professions in Presearing and decide which one is the best. Obviously, like in many other MMO games, there isn't one clear the best profession, but they can be categorized by which one is the best at different activities, so I will be comparing them all in the context of them being the primary profession. We will be comparing their attributes, their armor, their runes, how they perform in char runs, nick item farming, and XP grinding at max level. So I hope you'll enjoy. And a side note before we actually start, I made this video already, but I decided not to publish it because I wrote an entire script, etc. And when I recorded it, it felt like I'm just reading from paper, and it didn't feel too good to me, so I'm making this again in a more of a stream of consciousness style of video. So if I miss anything, if I forget anything, make sure to mention that down in the comments. And for now, I will be going straight into it. So Presearing is a tutorial area, and that means you can pretty much play whatever you like. And if I say stuff like, for example, mesmers aren't the best at farming char, that doesn't mean that mesmers are terrible at farming char and you will fail at it. Every single profession can do everything with relative ease, maybe except monks, but it's just compared between each other profession. So for example, mesmers are okay at doing char runs, but compared to elementalists, they are not that great. Alright, so let's start with the first one, being the ranger. Rangers are one of the most popular professions, in my opinion, tied for first place most popular with Elementalists, and that is because they do everything well. If you want just one character that can do everything in Presearing, then Ranger is that character. They are naturally tanky, they have higher armor than casters, and they have a pet, which in theory means that they get half the damage because enemies have 2 targets to attack. They have a fantastic primary attribute in expertise, which helps not only with energy management, but also with damage of point-blank shot. And while they aren't the fastest at char runs, they are, in my opinion, the second fastest, right behind Elementalists. And they are, in fact, the fastest at nick item farming, because they don't have to walk up to enemies and they don't have to wait through cast times. And if you're playing just one character in Presearing, then farming nick items will be a huge chunk of your time online, and it definitely feels good to play a ranger then. And they do struggle a little with high-level vanguard enemies, especially with the bosses that can heal themselves. You might have trouble killing Utini or Blazefiend Griefblade, so if you're not lucky with a good spike, you might actually hit a stalemate where none of you can kill each other and you just heal to full constantly. But if that happens, you can just downscale the quest with an alt and try again. One downside you cannot go over though is you need a Nevermore Floodbow to unlock your full damage potential. You either have it and you buy the Game of the Year, or you don't and you deal less damage. So without it, I would think twice before making a ranger, but even with just the in-game bows, they do quite good. They do lose a huge chunk of their damage though. Next up, there's warriors, and I would suggest making a warrior if you enjoy min-maxing your gear and you'd like to create a trophy character of sorts. They can freshen up their gameplay with 3 different weapon styles, 4 if you choose a ranger secondary, and getting every single best weapon with the best mods and add shields on top. That's content for you to do for years, while every other profession generally has one build and one weapon they want forever. Warriors are extremely tanky. They have 70 armor with Vanguard Initiate, which is double that of the casters. And on top of that, they have Knight's Insignia and Rune of Absorption to decrease the damage they take by 4. Which makes them, they can just stand in the middle of a pack of char and not feel a thing. But the downside is they have very poor primary attribute, strength isn't really that great, and they have terrible energy. They have to fight in melee unless, once again, you go with a warrior ranger style. And they also, just like rangers, need bonus weapons to unlock their full damage potential, and while everyone can buy Game of the Year for Rhino's Charge to have the hammer, it will be much harder to get your hands on a Glacial Blade, so if you want to play a Sword Warrior, that might be a little harder. But there is one light at the end of the tunnel. The best warrior skills are generally axes, and there is no bonus axe weapon, at least that I know of. So you can do really good even without any bonus weapons if you stick to playing axes. Warriors are about average in Northlands and about average in Nick farming. That is because in Northlands they don't have enough damage and they don't have enough AoE to compete with other professions. And at Nick farming, they have to walk up to every enemy, so they lose in that regard. But coming back to Northlands just for a second, they are so tanky that their runs are very smooth, so maybe if they are not the fastest, then definitely they're quite smooth in that regard. And while their tankiness helps them with staying alive, their damage versus high-level enemies is low, similarly to Rangers. But contrary to Rangers, they do have tools to deal with Mutiny and Blaze Fiend. They have Gash and Hammer Bash to counter their healing, so you will not have issues with that. And one last thing I think is important to mention, that if you get obscenely rich, and for some reason Warriors players do that, you can try and buy vampiric weapon mods that no longer drop since 2006, and while other professions can buy them too, they can just look at them from their bags. You as a warrior can actually use them and use them to great effect, so if you play extremely long term with huge ambitions, warrior is a great choice. With the martial professions now over, let's move on to the casters, and the first ones will be of course Elementalists, the kings and queens of char runs. If you want to get rare purple items, just make an Elementalist because they're just the best in the Northlands. Hot take, pun intended, is that the biggest advantage of playing an Elementalist primary is the access to Fire Rune, because Firestorm is just that good. Do you need Fire Runes to make it better? No, but it sure as hell feels good to pump that damage even higher. They're, as mentioned, the fastest char farmers in the Northlands, and that is mostly because enemies in Presearing don't scatter under AoE, so if you use Firestorm, you just clear entire groups with ease. And although there is some debate when it comes to primary attributes, I think energy storage is actually a great one. You cast spells as an Elementalist, you need energy, you get an attribute that gives you energy. Especially so, one of the spells that you have access to in Presearing is Aura of Restoration, and that scales with energy storage, so as an Elementalist primary, you have that attribute. And if you get energy storage up to 8, you start recovering 1 energy from spells, which makes essentially every single spell cost 1 energy less, so you can cast even more. And there is a pretty cookie cutter build in my opinion, with 14 fire, 8 energy storage and 8 healing, that includes runes. So that is pretty easy to hit at level 20, and you should have no issue with reducing your spell's energy costs. They are also very good at grinding XP at level 20, and they are so far the only profession proven to be able to farm Mutiny with efficiency. There was one player, TJ, that called rank 3 survivor while farming Mutiny exclusively, pretty much exclusively, and no other profession to my knowledge has done that, so they are very good in that regard as well. But they're not too great at Nick item farming, since that's mostly single target, and Flare has a tendency to miss quite a lot. But Elementalists are the best at farming dice and event items, so if you have another character to do the single target farming for you, then you will benefit greatly from having an Elementalist in your arsenal. I had to find a downside somewhere, and that is good Elementalist items are the most expensive items you can buy in Presearing. Every single person wants Elementalists plus fire items, so be prepared to spend a lot of black dice if you want good equipment, but other than that, Elementalists are really good. Moving on from one of the best to, in my opinion, the worst profession in Presearing, although I think that's just a fact now, monks are absolutely the weakest primary profession in Presearing. It's no coincidence that the letters that spell monk are so close to the L on the keyboard. I can only recommend monks if you really want a challenge of being the weakest and trying to work something out of it. Their primary attribute is very weak, it has no energy management, it just helps you heal a little more, and their offensive spells suffer from low damage numbers and very high cooldowns. And that means you don't really want to use them, and that means you don't really want to use their runes. So to sum up, whatever you want to do, you're always better picking some other profession as a primary. Monks are very good as a secondary profession, but when it comes to the primaries, just pick something else. Next up, we're moving on to the Necromancers, and they're a little bit harder to quantify. I could compare them to a caster version of Rangers, in that you have this one profession that can do everything quite well in Presearing, although compared to Rangers who can just recline and auto everything, Necromancers have to put in a little bit more effort. They have a fantastic primary attribute in Soul Reaping, they get extremely good energy management out of that, and they also have access to Death Magic runes, which are the main scaling attribute of Bone Horrors, which are the iconic Necromancer spell in Presearing, and the reason they do quite well in the Northlands. If they can get their horde rolling, they can do pretty big char pools, and since there are a lot of bodies and a lot of enemies die, that also fuels the Soul Reaping, and it's just this cycle that repeats. And Necromancers are also quite good at nick item farming. They're probably, in my opinion, the best caster to do that, thanks to Deathly Swarm, which deals very high damage, and it also cannot miss, unlike Flare, and it also attacks adjacent enemies. But they do struggle a little bit when it comes to grinding XP and staying alive at level 20. They have many vampiric spells that steal life from enemies, but their main regen spell, Blood Renewal, can actually damage you, so you have to put in that little bit more thought and consideration when soloing. And all in all, just like I said before, they require a bit more effort than other professions, but you can get some pretty great results. And one last thing that I think is worth mentioning is that Necromancers are a great base for some wonky builds in Presearing, like a Necro Ranger Zoo build based on summons, or a Necromesmer Hex build. So if you put a little bit of love into your Necromancer, I'm sure you can get some pretty interesting results. And last but certainly not least, we have the Mesmers, which are admittedly the profession that I have the least experience with, but I know one thing, that they're actually the single best profession at farming experience at level 20, and it's no coincidence that the first two legendary survivor players were Mesmers. Everything in a Mesmer build seems tailored for those fast bandit clears at Farmer Hamnet quest. They have fast casting, which drops energy management in favor of casting spells even faster. They have empathy and they have backfire, and AI in Presearing just hands themselves to you on a silver platter if you use those. They definitely are the best when it comes to specifically bandit farming in Farmer Hamnet. I don't know about any other high-level Vanguard quests, but for those two, they are the kings and queens. They are not too great in Northlands, and they are not too great at nick item farming, mostly because of the upsides I mentioned before. They are so focused on that single target highest DPS fast casting that they just don't have enough energy management to keep going in Northlands. And since their spells rely on enemies attacking, they're also not that great at nick item farming. They're just a little bit too slow in that department. But if you want to be the highest XP haver in Presearing, or you want to get the legendary survivor, Mesmer definitely is a really good pick. Just maybe have another Presearing character to do all the farming. And that will be it for the video today, so thank you for watching. Please let me know if you think I was wrong somewhere. Maybe I underestimated some professions, maybe I overestimated some. We all play the same game, but we have different perspectives, and reading comments is like the best part of posting videos to the internet. So anyways, until then, Thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.